Chapter 8, Part 2, Discontinued, decide whether to discontinue an operation, product mix with constraints, and make or buy decisions, along with whether you should decide whether you want to sell the product as is or process further. So, considerations for discontinuing products. Will the total fixed costs continue to exist even if the product line is discontinued? Can any direct fixed costs of the product be avoided if the product line is discontinued? And we're going to use our incremental analysis for determining this. So let's go to our decision tree. Discontinued a product department or store. If lost revenue from discontinuing a product department or store exceed the cost savings, you don't discontinue it. However, if total cost savings exceed the lost revenues, then you do discontinue. So let's take a look at an example. So here's Mike's company. He's considering discontinuing this line of product because they've had losses of $2.55 million. So the first thing we want to do is figure out what our variable costs are. So we know our fixed costs are 40% of cost of goods sold. So we take that 1 minus 4 because we know variable must be what? 60%. So we're going to take it times the 6250, and now we know our variable cost of goods sold and our variable. We do the same thing for operations. So now we have our total variable cost, and now we can do a contribution margin income statement. We're taking our sales minus variable. That's our contribution margin, less the fixed costs. Doesn't look good. So now we're going to prepare an incremental analysis for the discontinued operation, assuming that only $725,000 of the fixed costs would go away. The contribution margin lost is $415,000, less the fixed costs tell us that if we discontinue this product, we're going to gain $310,000. So we should discontinue it. Now let's look at constraints and product mix. Our decision tree. Which product to emphasize? Emphasize the product with the highest contribution margin per unit. So, constraints, they restrict the amount of product a company can manufacture sell. So, it would be the maximum you can produce. What constraints stop us from making or displaying all of the units we sell? Which product offers the highest contribution margin per unit? And would emphasizing one product over another affect the fixed costs or sales of another product? So let's take a look at an example. My Corp produced 2 products and they can sell all the product they can produce. They want to expand the plant and are trying to decide which of the 2 to emphasize. This is the information. So we know for product A, we have a contribution margin of 81.1%, and product B, we have a contribution margin of 65.4%. The number of units per machine hour is 25 for product A and 65 for product B. After expansion, they can only make they have a machine that can only produce 4,000 units per hour, 4,000 machine hours per month. What are the constraints? Well, the constraint is the machine hours. The maximum we can use are 4,000. So let's do an analysis. We know that the contribution margin for each times the number of units per machine hour, the contribution margin per machine hour times the maximum capacity tells us the contribution margin for each product. Based on this, we should emphasize product B because that's where we'll make the most money, because it has the highest contribution per machine hour. Now let's take a look at outsourcing, make or buy. This is something a lot of companies look at. So what should we consider? to buy a product or service, to do it in-house, or to go outside. How best to use available resources? How do our variable costs compare to the outsourcing cost? Are any fixed costs avoidable if we outsource? And what could we do with the freed capacity? So now let's look at our decision tree. If the incremental costs of making exceed the incremental costs of outsourcing, we outsource. If the incremental costs of making are less, then we don't outsource. So let's take a look at another example. Here's Mike's company. He has an average cost of $12 to produce 19,000 units. A supplier offered to make the part for an additional, when you look at all the costs, $17.50. It is predicted that it would reduce fixed overhead costs by $1,900. So let's do an analysis. First, we figure out what are our total variable costs. That's all we care about. So variable costs are 147 if we make it. If we buy it outside, they're 332,500. Our fixed costs would only go down a little bit if we buy it. And the total cost, as you can see from this, we should not outsource because it's almost twice as much, twice as expensive. Now, same problem. What if instead we could add $3,100 to their profits? All right. And by making another unit. So we have three choices. We can make, buy, and make another unit. And as you can see, it's still cheaper to just make it in-house. Not a good decision. They have to do something else. Now, the other one we're going to look at is what happens if you make, sell as is, or process further. So, how much revenue is generated if we sell the product as is, and how much revenue is generated if we sell the product after further processing? And first, we have to look at how much does it cost to further process. So our decision tree. If extra revenue exceeds extra costs, we proceed further. If extra revenue is less than extra costs, then we sell as is. So let's take a look at an example. So Mike paid $245,000 to process 70,000 gallons of acetone, and they can sell it as is for $1.90 a gallon. Alternatively, it can be processed further and yield 65,000 gallons of lacquer thinner that could be sold for $3.30 per gallon. The additional processing cost is 65 cents, along with 22 cents for shipping and 13 cents per gallon for admin, for a total of 95 cents per gallon. I think that's actually $1, right? Yeah, wait. Okay, I fixed it. It's $1. So what are the sunk costs? Our sunk costs are the 245,000 we've already spent, so we're going to ignore that. Should they process further? Well, the total additional variable cost is $1. Sorry, I had jets flying overhead. All right, so let's do an analysis. So what would it cost? What is the cost if we sell as is? It's 133,000. What if we process further? We end up earning 149,500, which means that we would make 16,500 more. So we should process further. And that completes the end of this presentation.